After 45 years of marriage, my son split $25 million like poker chips. And I was handed a dusty envelope. That's how my husband's will was read in a cold office on a Tuesday morning in Columbus, Ohio. A lifetime of sacrifice, and I was treated like I didn't exist. Tell me, what would you do if your own children laughed while stripping you of everything? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Let me know where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe so I can keep bringing you stories that matter. My name is Martha Williams. I'm 72 years old, a retired librarian who spent decades guiding children through books while quietly raising two of my own. I thought my reward would be respect, security, maybe even gratitude. Instead, I learned betrayal has a face, and it looks like your own flesh and blood. The lawyer's monotone voice carved the air. To Robert, I leave the Williams hotel chain. My eldest leaned back, lips curling with satisfaction. To James, I leave the ranch, the coastal estates, and the yacht. My younger son's grin widened, the greed in his eyes impossible to miss. I sat straighter, waiting, heartbeat thundering, believing my name would come with dignity. Instead, the lawyer cleared his throat, pulled out a faded packet, and said, "To Mrs. Williams, I leave this personal envelope." A laugh burst from Linda, my daughter-in-law, sharp as glass. "At least you can use it for grocery lists, Mom." Robert didn't spare me a glance. James sighed, bored already, done with me. I slipped the envelope into my purse, fingers trembling. My violet dress, the one Arthur gave me on our last anniversary, felt suddenly like a cruel joke. I stood chair, scraping the floor, but not one person stopped me. No goodbye, no acknowledgement, just silence, as if I were a ghost haunting their fortune. Outside, the October wind cut through me like a blade. Traffic hummed, children's laughter rang in the distance, life carried on. And there I was, a 72-year-old widow, clutching a worthless envelope, humiliated beyond words. But grief has a strange way of shifting into something else. Rage. Defiance. A whisper inside me said this wasn't the end. Not by a long shot. They thought they had buried me in dust. They didn't know that inside this fragile envelope lay the spark that would set everything ablaze. I don't remember the drive home. One moment I was standing in the biting wind outside the lawyer's office, clutching that pathetic envelope like a lifeline. The next I was pulling into my quiet street in suburban Ohio, the oak trees arching over the pavement like mourners at a funeral. My neighbors waved as if nothing had happened, as if I wasn't returning from the execution of my dignity. I waved back because that's what you do when your world is crumbling. You pretend. Inside my little brick house, silence greeted me. Arthur's chair sat empty in the corner, his favorite plaid blanket still draped over the armrest. The clock ticked with cruel indifference. I dropped my purse on the table, the envelope sliding out like a secret begging to be told. For hours I avoided it. I made tea I didn't drink. I wandered from room to room, touching the photos of our wedding, our son's first birthdays, holidays, where we'd smiled as if nothing could ever shatter us. But it had shattered, and all I had left was that thin, yellowed packet. Finally, when the night pressed heavy against the windows and the loneliness wrapped around me like chains, I sat at the kitchen table. My hands trembled as I broke the brittle seal. Inside was not a stack of money, not deeds, not even a letter of apology. Just one folded piece of paper. Arthur's handwriting. I knew it instantly. Elegant, steady, the same script he used in love notes tucked into my lunchbox when we were young. My eyes blurred as I read the words, "For the one who truly loved me." Below a series of numbers, an account at a bank in New York, nothing else. I let the paper fall to the table, my breath caught between a laugh and a sob. Was this some cruel joke? After 45 years of being his partner in everything, selling my jewelry to help him expand the business, raising our sons while he built an empire, was this all he thought I deserved? A string of numbers, a sentimental gesture to ease his guilt. I pressed my palms into my eyes, trying to stop the tears. My sons had wealth properties power. I had digits on a page that might not mean anything. Maybe it was an old account closed decades ago. Maybe it had $10 left in it. Maybe Arthur had simply wanted to leave me with the illusion of significance. Yet something tugged at me. Arthur was many things, driven distant, at times even secretive, but he was never careless. He had planned every deal, every expansion, every step of our lives with ruthless precision. He wouldn't have written these words without purpose. I picked up the paper again, for the one who truly loved me, not for Robert, who gambled away opportunities, not for James, who cared more for appearances than honesty, for me, the woman who had stayed, endured, supported. My throat tightened. I whispered into the empty kitchen, "Arthur, what did you leave me?" The refrigerator hummed. The house creaked. No answer. Only the numbers staring back at me, daring me to believe. I folded the paper carefully, tucking it back into the envelope. The humiliation of the day still burned in my chest, but now it mingled with something else, a spark of curiosity, a fragile thread of hope. What if this wasn't nothing? What if Arthur had hidden more than anyone knew? I sat there until dawn, staring at that envelope, the cup of tea cold at my elbow, the ghosts of betrayal and love battling inside me. My sons thought I had been left with scraps. Linda thought she'd broken me with her laughter. But as the first light of morning streamed across the kitchen, illuminating the faded ink on Arthur's note, I felt the faintest shift inside myself. Perhaps I wasn't finished. Perhaps this envelope wasn't the end. Perhaps it was the beginning. I barely slept that night. The envelope lay on the table like a living thing, whispering to me each time I closed my eyes. When dawn came, I brewed a pot of coffee I never touched. My hands trembled as I held the piece of paper with Arthur's handwriting, the numbers etched into my mind like a secret code. By mid-morning, I could no longer endure the not knowing. I picked up the phone and dialed the number of the bank, scrawled at the bottom of the page, a branch of New York International. My voice shook as I gave the account information, my date of birth, my marriage certificate details. There was a long pause on the other end, the kind of pause that makes your stomach drop. Finally, the operator spoke. "Mrs. Williams, I'll need to transfer you to a senior officer. Please hold." My heart thundered in my chest. I gripped the receiver as if it might slip from my hands. A man's voice came on, calm but precise. "Mrs. Williams, thank you for verifying your information. I want to inform you that the account is active and currently holds a balance of—" He hesitated as if weighing whether I could handle the words. $90 million. The world tilted. My knees buckled and I sank into Arthur's chair, clutching the armrest like it might anchor me. 90 million, I thought I'd misheard. "I'm sorry," I stammered. "Did you say 90 million? "Yes, ma'am." 90 million United States dollars, he repeated. I pressed the phone to my ear, stunned into silence. My sons had gloated over their 25 million inheritance, dividing it like scavengers over a carcass. And yet here was Arthur leaving me a fortune they couldn't even imagine. The officer continued, his tone professional, but tinged with something else, respect, perhaps. "Additionally, Mrs. Williams, our records indicate a secured deposit box registered under your name. It was placed in storage 2 years ago with specific instructions for delivery upon request. Would you like us to arrange that?" My voice barely rose above a whisper. "Yes, please." He promised to schedule a courier for the following morning. I thanked him, though the words felt inadequate. When I hung up, the silence in the house was deafening, broken only by the sound of my own uneven breathing. 90 million. The number echoed in my skull. It wasn't just money. It was proof. Proof that Arthur had seen me. Proof that I was not invisible, not expendable, not the ghost my children tried to turn me into. I walked through the house in a daze, brushing my fingers across the photographs lining the mantel. Robert at his graduation, James on his wedding day, Linda smiling with her perfectly rehearsed grin. They believed they had won. They believed their father had left me with scraps. But Arthur had hidden an entire empire in plain sight, an empire meant only for me. Still, the joy was tangled with questions. Why had he hidden it? Why hadn't he told me what other secrets had Arthur kept tucked away behind that stoic smile and endless business trips? That night, I barely touched my dinner. Instead, I sat at the table staring at the envelope, now transformed from an insult into a lifeline. My humiliation had been real, but so was this revelation. Tomorrow, a courier would bring me the deposit box. Tomorrow I would find out what Arthur had locked away not just from the world, but from me. As I turned out the kitchen light, I whispered into the darkness, "Arthur, what else have you done?" The house creaked. The night pressed close, and for the first time since the will reading, I felt something spark inside me. Not fear, not despair, but anticipation. They thought they had buried me under shame, but Arthur had left me a weapon, and I intended to use it. I barely slept again. The numbers 90 million echoed all night like a hymn I couldn't silence. But it wasn't just the money, it was the promise of the deposit box. When the doorbell rang at precisely 10 the next morning, my heart nearly gave out. A man in a dark suit stood on my porch holding a steel case small enough to carry but heavy enough that his arm trembled. "Mrs. Williams," he asked. I nodded, signing the receipt with shaky hands. He set the box on my dining table, wished me good day, and disappeared, leaving me alone with Arthur's final secret. The box stared back at me, silent and foreboding. My fingers hovered over the envelope taped to the lid. Inside was a slip of paper with a combination 06 15 1970. Our wedding date. My throat tightened. Even in death, Arthur was speaking to me, weaving romance into riddles. I dialed the numbers slowly. The lock clicked a sound sharp as thunder in the quiet house. The lid creaked open. For a moment, I just stared. Stacks of documents, photographs, audio cassettes, and one thick envelope marked in bold letters, "For Martha's eyes only." I pulled out the letter first. Arthur's handwriting again steady, deliberate. "My dearest Martha, if you are reading this, it means I am gone. I needed you to see who our sons truly are. I could not protect you in life, so I leave you the tools to protect yourself now." I swallowed hard and kept reading the words, blurring as tears welled. Robert is drowning in gambling debts. $2 million owed to men who don't forgive. He has mortgaged the ranch twice behind everyone's back. The papers are enclosed. James, his demons are worse. He's addicted to opioids. He has been laundering money through the restaurants tied to dealers who will not hesitate to destroy him. I have evidence, bank records, photographs. But the darkest truth, my love, is that they have conspired with Linda. I overheard them one night when they thought I was sleeping under medication. They planned to declare you incompetent, have you committed to a facility in Florida, and take everything. They even laughed about how easy it would be. The letter slipped from my hand. For a moment, the room spun. My own children, the babies I once rocked to sleep, had plotted to lock me away like unwanted furniture. Linda, the woman who had mocked me with her perfect smile, had been their partner in betrayal. I reached for the photographs. One showed Robert outside a casino at 3 a.m., staggering drunk, slipping papers into the hand of a man whose face radiated menace. Another showed James hunched in the bathroom of some nightclub, a rolled bill in his hand, white powder smeared beneath his nose. Contracts followed loan agreements, forged signatures, even a deposit receipt for a care facility 3 hours from here, Willow Creek Senior Living. They had already placed a down payment. A sob clawed its way up my throat, but I bit it back. No, I would not give them my tears. Not anymore. For years, I had been the invisible one, the supporting cast, the dutiful wife, the mother who sacrificed. And now, the truth was laid bare. My sons were criminals, addicts, cowards. They wanted me silenced, hidden, erased. But Arthur had armed me with more than money. He had left me their secrets, their sins written in black and white. And as I looked at the evidence spread across my dining table, something shifted inside me. The humiliation of the will reading no longer felt like defeat. It was the opening act of a war. I gathered the documents, slid them back into the safe, and locked it with steady hands. My heart still ached, but beneath the grief burned something fiercer. They thought they could strip me of dignity. They thought they could bury me alive in some nursing home. But they had underestimated me. For the first time in decades, I felt the stirrings of power, and I whispered into the quiet house, "You wanted to lock me away. Now you'll see what happens when I fight back." I sat at the dining table long after the safe was closed, the weight of Arthur's revelations pressing down on me. My sons weren't just reckless, they were dangerous. And Linda, the woman who mocked me with a smirk, had been ready to bury me alive in a nursing home. I thought I was alone in this war until the knock came at my door that evening. When I opened it, a tall man in a gray overcoat stood on my porch holding a leather briefcase. His presence was calm but commanding. "Mrs. Williams?" he asked. "Yes," I said cautiously. "My name is George Miller. Your husband retained me 2 years ago to manage certain private matters. He instructed me to contact you only after his death. May I come in?" The name felt like a spark of recognition. Arthur had been meticulous preparing for storms before I even knew there were clouds. I stepped aside. George walked in, glancing around the modest home before setting his case on the table, the same table still holding Arthur's damning evidence. He unclasped the case and spread out a stack of documents thicker than anything the family lawyer had ever shown. "Your husband wanted you to know the truth," George said. "Not just about your sons, but about the company. On paper, Robert and James inherited control. But legally," he tapped the top document, "you are the majority shareholder. Arthur transferred 51% of the holding company into your name. Your sons cannot touch the empire without you." The air left my lungs. For days I'd felt powerless, humiliated, and now George was telling me I held the keys all along. He leaned closer, lowering his voice. "Arthur knew what they were planning, Mrs. Williams. That's why he built this structure. He wanted them to expose themselves before you revealed your hand." I closed my eyes. Arthur's foresight wrapping around me like a shield. For so long I had thought he'd left me with nothing. In reality, he had given me the power to destroy or to save. Before I could respond, another knock sounded at the door. My first instinct was fear, but when I opened it, relief washed over me. "Evening," Martha said. "Clara Johnson, my neighbor from 2 houses down." She was 75, her silver hair tucked neatly under a scarf, her shoulders stooped, but her eyes sharp. She held a Tupperware dish in her hands. "I baked too much cornbread, thought you might want some." Her kindness almost undid me. "Come in, Clara." She stepped inside immediately, sensing the tension in the room. Her eyes darted to George, then to the papers spread across the table. "I hope I'm not intruding." "Not at all," I said, forcing a smile. "In fact, maybe it's time you knew." Over cornbread and coffee, the truth spilled out. Clara listened silently, her hands folded in her lap. When I finished, her lips trembled, but not from shock, rather from recognition. "My daughter did the same to me," she whispered. "Convinced me to sign over my pension, promised she'd take care of me. Within a year, I had nothing. I had to beg the church for help. People like us were easy to erase, Martha. But Arthur gave you a chance most of us never get." Her words pierced deeper than any document. I wasn't just fighting for myself. I was fighting for every woman discarded by her own blood. George slid a pen across the table. "Mrs. Williams, you don't need to decide everything tonight. But understand this, you hold the power now. Use it wisely, and they'll never see you coming." I stared at the pen, my reflection glinting on its polished surface. The helpless widow they thought they'd buried was gone. With George's counsel and Clara's quiet solidarity, I felt something ignite in me, resolve. For the first time, I wasn't just reacting to betrayal. I was preparing for war. George's words stayed with me long after he left. "You hold the power now." I repeated them to myself like a prayer, like armor. And yet power means nothing if you don't know when to use it. 3 days later, the doorbell rang. When I opened it, Robert and James stood there in their crisp suits, Linda beside them, with that smile she wore like a dagger. And behind them, a stranger, a tall man with a black leather bag, glasses perched low on his nose. "Mom," Robert said smoothly, "this is Dr. Harold Evans. He's here to give you a wellness check. Just routine. We're worried about you." My stomach dropped. George had warned me they might try this. A doctor to declare me mentally incompetent to lock me away before I could act. I forced a smile, stepping aside. "Of course. Come in." We moved into the living room. The doctor pulled out papers from his bag, commitment forms. I recognized them instantly. My heart thundered, but I kept my hands steady. Hidden in the pocket of my sweater was a tiny recorder George had given me. I pressed the button. The red light glowed faintly. Mrs. Williams, the doctor, began in a syrupy voice. "I'll just ask a few questions. Can you tell me today's date?" "October 21st, I replied without hesitation. "Do you remember what you inherited from your husband's will?" There it was. The trap. If I said nothing but an envelope, they'd use it to prove I was destitute and delusional. If I mentioned the hidden fortune, they'd call me crazy. I leaned forward, locking eyes with Robert. I remember perfectly. My son split $25 million while I received an envelope you considered worthless. Do I sound confused to you? Robert's smirk faltered. James shifted uncomfortably. Linda shot me a venomous glare. The doctor scribbled furiously, but before he could speak again, a voice called from the porch. "Need me to bring in the coffee, Martha?" It was Clara, sweet, sharp-eyed Clara. She stepped inside her phone in her hand. Only then did I realize she was filming, live streaming, straight to the church community page that half our town followed. "Who are these fine gentlemen?" she asked, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "And why are they trying to trick my neighbor into signing papers?" Linda lunged toward her. "Turn that off." But Clara only raised her phone higher. Not a chance. Everyone's watching. I saw the panic ripple through Robert and James. They hadn't counted on witnesses, let alone an audience of hundreds. The doctor stammered, "This is just a medical evaluation routine." Clara cut him off. "Routine doesn't come with pre-filled commitment forms. Routine doesn't show up unannounced with the children who stand to gain millions if Martha disappears." The chat bubbles on her live stream popped faster than raindrops. "Protect her, call the police, we're on our way." For the first time, I watched my children's confidence crumble. James tried to snatch the phone, but Clara, frail as she looked, moved with surprising speed. Everyone just saw that she taunted, "Lay one finger on me and you'll regret it." I finally stood calm but firm. "This game is over. I know what you're planning, and now so does everyone else." The doctor paled, packing his bag in a hurry. I should be going." He practically ran out the door. Robert and James followed, muttering curses, their faces white as chalk. Linda lingered, her lips pressed thin before storming out behind them. Silence filled the house. Then Clara turned to me, a grin spreading across her face. "Well, she said that was one hell of a first strike." I laughed, a sound I hadn't made in weeks. For the first time, the battlefield didn't feel so lonely. Clara's laughter still echoed in my ears long after the door slammed behind my children. The live stream had humiliated them in front of half the town, but I knew humiliation wasn't enough. Cornered animals grow more dangerous, and Robert and James were desperate men. The very next morning, George returned. He set his briefcase down on the same table where Arthur's secrets had first shattered me, and slid a small black phone across the polished wood. Sleek, modern, and heavier than it looked. "This," he said, tapping the single red button in its center, "is your lifeline. It connects directly to my office and the Columbus Police Department. If they try anything at all, you press it, and within minutes, officers will be at your door." I stared at the phone. For 72 years, I had lived by routines, library shelves, Sunday dinners, church bake sales. Now I was a woman with a red phone that could summon the law like a sword. George leaned closer. "They know you hold evidence that could ruin them. They won't give up quietly. Expect them to push harder. But you, Martha..." He paused, searching my eyes. "You're stronger than they think." That night, as the October wind rattled my windows, I placed the phone on my nightstand. A strange comfort pulsed from that little device. Power. Protection. Proof that I was no longer alone. 2 days passed before the storm broke again. Robert showed up first, pounding on my door like a debt collector. His voice was hoarse, desperate. "Mom, open up. We need to talk through the peephole." I saw James lurking behind him, jaw-tight fists clenched. Linda hovered at the curb, pacing like a vulture circling a dying animal. I opened the door a crack. "What is it?" Robert's eyes were wild. "We know what you're doing. You've turned the whole town against us. But you don't understand, Mom, the debts the people I owe. These aren't bankers you can sweet talk. These are men who don't forgive." James stepped forward, his face pale, but his words sharp. "You need to hand over Dad's accounts before someone gets hurt. You can't stop this." The audacity of it nearly took my breath. They weren't begging for forgiveness. They were threatening me again. I tightened my grip on the doorframe. "Someone is going to get hurt if you keep down this path. But it won't be me." Their faces hardened. James shoved at the door, forcing it wider. "Enough games, Mother. You're old, you're weak, and you don't know who you're dealing with." My heart raced, but my hands were steady. Slowly, deliberately, I reached into my cardigan pocket, pulled out the red phone, and pressed the button. The beep was small, almost gentle, but the effect was seismic. Robert's eyes widened. "What did you just do?" "I warned you," I said calmly, raising the phone for them to see. "You're not the only ones who can play this game." Sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder. Panic flickered across James's face. Linda froze on the sidewalk, her phone halfway to her ear, as if deciding whether to call her lawyer or her lover. Within minutes, 2 patrol cars screeched to a stop in front of my house. Officers jumped out, hands on their belts, authoritative and calm. George himself arrived seconds later, stepping from his car like a man arriving at a chessboard already won. "Mrs. Williams," one officer said, tipping his hat respectfully, "we received your signal." "Everything all right?" I gestured to my sons. "They came here to intimidate me." Again. The officer turned to Robert and James. "You two need to understand your mother has legal representation evidence and now a direct line to us. One more incident and we won't just respond, we'll arrest." The blood drained from Robert's face. James muttered something under his breath, but even he couldn't disguise the tremor in his voice. They weren't in control anymore. I was. George placed a reassuring hand on my shoulder. "You've just drawn a line they cannot cross. And they know it." As the cruisers pulled away, my son stood on the sidewalk, stunned and powerless. For the first time, I saw something I hadn't seen in years. Not arrogance, not cruelty. Fear. They finally understood the helpless old widow they had dismissed now held every card, and I wasn't finished playing. After the police left, the silence in my house felt different. Not heavy with fear anymore, but sharp with possibility. My sons had looked terrified on that sidewalk, terrified because for the first time in their lives, they weren't the ones holding power. George stayed late that night outlining my options. "You could cut them off completely," he said. "Sell the companies. Keep the fortune hidden. Walk away." I shook my head. No. Walking away would make me like them cowards. They need to face consequences. Real ones. The next morning, I dressed in a gray pantsuit Arthur had once bought me, but I'd never dared to wear. I wasn't the shadow wife anymore. I was the majority shareholder of the Williams empire, and it was time my children learned what that meant. I summoned them all to the hotel boardroom, Robert, James, and Linda. George sat beside me at the head of the long mahogany table. Clara, bless her, insisted on sitting in the back, arms crossed, her phone ready. Robert strutted in first, trying to wear his usual smirk, but his eyes betrayed the sleepless nights. James followed, gaunt and jittery sweat clinging to his collar. And then Linda, immaculate as ever, heels clicking across the polished floor, her lips painted like blood. I cleared my throat. "Sit." They obeyed. For once, no backtalk, no laughter, just silence. "I've made my decision," I began. "Robert, you've bled this company dry. $3 million stolen to cover your gambling debts. You've mortgaged the family ranch twice. You call yourself a CEO. You're a thief in a suit. Effective immediately, you resign. You'll work at the hotel as a regular employee until you pay back every penny. Housekeeping, front desk, kitchen duty, I don't care. But you will learn what honest work feels like." His face flushed crimson. "You can't do that," George slid the legal documents across the table. "Actually, she can. As majority shareholder, she already has." Robert's shoulders sagged. For the first time, he looked small. I turned to James. My voice softened, but only slightly. "And you, the drugs, the traffickers, the properties you sold, you will check into rehab tomorrow. Not some luxury spa, but a real clinic. And you will cooperate with the police. Give them names, contacts, everything you know about that network. It's that or prison." James's lips trembled. "Mom, they'll kill me if I talk." "They'll kill you if you don't," I said coldly. "At least this way you might live long enough to start over. Tears welled in his eyes, but he nodded. Then my gaze fell on Linda. She raised her chin, all defiance and gloss. "Don't look at me. I've done nothing wrong." I almost smiled. "Really? Should I show Robert the photographs of you with your tennis coach at the Hampton Inn? Or the bank statements showing the $50,000 you siphoned from the company fund into your private account?" Her face drained of color. "Here's what's going to happen," I continued. "You're going to sign these divorce papers. You will walk away from this family without a single dime. If you refuse, every photo and every document goes public tomorrow." Linda's eyes darted toward Robert, searching for support, but he stared at her with a look of betrayal so raw it nearly cut the air. Finally, her hand shook as she picked up the pen. The scratch of her signature was the sweetest sound I'd ever heard. When it was done, I gathered the papers. "This is not revenge. This is justice. You took my love, my loyalty, my silence for granted. That ends today. From now on, you will earn whatever place you have left in this family." The room stayed quiet, heavy with the weight of defeat. For the first time, my children didn't look like conquerors. They looked like prisoners facing their sentence. And I felt free. The boardroom silence still lingered in my chest long after Robert James and Linda had slunk away. Their signatures on the papers were like shackles snapping shut, but instead of satisfaction, I felt a strange emptiness. Justice was necessary, but it didn't erase the years of betrayal. George remained after the others left, stacking the documents into his briefcase. His eyes held something more, an unease I hadn't seen before. "Martha," he said carefully, "there's one more matter Arthur wanted me to handle. He asked me to wait until you'd asserted control before telling you." My stomach tightened. "Another account? Another property?" George shook his head. "No, this is about family." He handed me a thin envelope different from the dusty one I'd received at the will reading. This one was new, crisp, my husband's handwriting unmistakable. I opened it with trembling hands. Inside was a short letter. "For the woman who gave me everything. There's someone you need to meet. Her name is Sophie. She's 22. She is blood of your blood. I could not protect her the way I should have, but I made sure she would not be forgotten." Below the note was a photocopy of a trust account, a scholarship fund annual deposit signed by Arthur himself. My heart skipped. "Who is Sophie?" George's voice was low. "She's James's daughter. He fathered her when he was barely out of high school. The mother was young alone. James refused responsibility. He walked away. Arthur found out years later and quietly supported Sophie through school. He wanted her to have a chance at life away from this family's corruption." I pressed the letter to my chest, the air leaving me in sharp bursts. James, my son, my selfish, broken son who had nearly sold his soul for drugs he had left a child behind, my grandchild, my flesh and blood, George continued. "Arthur asked me to tell you that Sophie is everything this family should have been: resilient, hard-working, pure-hearted. She doesn't know the full truth yet, but she knows you exist. She's curious about you." Tears blurred my vision. A granddaughter, hidden in plain sight while I was drowning in grief, betrayed by my children but perhaps gifted with something far more precious. "Where is she?" I whispered. "She's at Ohio State University, studying social work, paid for with the fund Arthur created. He believed she might be the redemption this family desperately needed." A swirl of emotions tore through me: anger at James, sorrow for Sophie, awe at Arthur's secret devotion. But most of all, a new fire sparked in me. This fight wasn't just about defending myself anymore. It was about protecting her. Images flashed in my mind: Sophie as a little girl with no father to hold her hand. Sophie studying late at night with Arthur's quiet support behind her. Sophie growing up believing she was alone in the world. My chest ached. I looked at George. "I need to meet her. Not tomorrow. Not someday. Now." He nodded slowly. "Arthur wanted that. But he also wanted you to be strong first. To face Robert and James so that when Sophie stepped into your life, she wouldn't inherit enemies, but an empire rebuilt in truth." I gripped the letter, its words burning into me. My husband hadn't left me with an envelope of pity. He'd left me with a legacy, a reason to fight beyond revenge. For the first time since Arthur's death, I felt something I thought had been buried forever: hope. I whispered her name aloud as if testing it on my tongue. Sophie. It felt like the beginning of a new chapter, not just for me, but for her. And God help anyone who tried to take her away from me. I couldn't sleep after learning Sophie's name. Her face haunted me, though I hadn't seen it yet. I imagined the curve of Arthur's smile in her, maybe even my eyes. For the first time since the will reading, I felt like this wasn't just about surviving betrayal. It was about building something for her, something worthy. George arranged the introductions slowly, careful not to overwhelm her. When Sophie finally stepped into my home, she was taller than I expected, with long auburn hair and a quiet strength in her posture. She carried herself with dignity, even though her childhood had been marked by abandonment. "Grandma," she said shyly, testing the word like it might break between her lips. My throat closed. I pulled her into my arms, tears spilling down my cheeks. "I should have been there for you," I whispered, "but I promise you that ends now." Clara sat nearby, smiling knowingly. She had become my anchor, reminding me daily that age didn't erase strength. Now, with Sophie by my side, I felt like the three of us, widow, neighbor, granddaughter, were about to rewrite what family meant. The very next week, I walked into the Williams Hotel headquarters, not as a ghost, but as its rightful owner. Employees paused mid-task when they saw me in the lobby, whispers trailing after me. For decades, they had only known Robert as the arrogant boss who drove luxury cars while cutting wages. Now they saw me, a 72-year-old woman in a gray suit, standing taller than I had in years. I called a meeting with every department head. George sat at my side. Sophie and Clara stood behind me like sentinels. This company I began my voice steady was built on the back of honest labor. For too long, that labor has been disrespected. That ends today. Eyes widened. Murmurs spread across the room. Effective immediately, I continued, we are increasing base pay by 20%. Employee health care will be expanded, and any vendor contracts tied to fraud or favoritism will be terminated. The room erupted in applause. Some of the staff even stood tears in their eyes. They had suffered under Robert's greed, and now they saw something they hadn't dared to hope for: fairness. As for Robert, he was stripped of his title and reassigned. I made the announcement in front of everyone. From today forward, Robert Williams will no longer serve as CEO. Instead, he will be training with housekeeping and maintenance, learning every corner of the business from the ground up. Gasps echoed. Robert's face burned red, but he couldn't object, not with the legal documents signed and sealed. The next morning, I watched from the hotel balcony as my son carried sheets up to the 10th floor, sweat staining his collar. For the first time in his life, he was earning an honest day's wage. There was no smirk, no arrogance, just exhaustion. And maybe, just maybe, the beginnings of humility. At the ranch, changes swept through as well. Sophie joined me on those visits, her eyes lighting up as she spoke, with workers asking questions, listening. She had Arthur's natural gift for connecting with people. Clara, too, rolled up her sleeves, checking payroll, reviewing conditions, ensuring no one was being cheated. Bit by bit, the empire Arthur left behind began to look less like a monument to greed and more like a promise of dignity. Employees who had once feared losing their jobs now spoke of pride. The air felt different, lighter, freer. As I walked through the hotel one evening, staff greeting me with warmth I'd never known before, I realized something profound. I wasn't just fighting against betrayal anymore. I was building for Sophie, for the workers, for every woman who had ever been silenced, overlooked, discarded. Arthur had left me wealth, but more importantly, he'd left me the power to change what that wealth stood for. And now, with Clara's wisdom and Sophie's hope, I was determined to wield it well. The applause of the hotel staff still echoed in my ears as I walked home that evening, Sophie at my side, Clara linking her arm through mine. For the first time in months, I felt like Arthur's empire wasn't just surviving, it was breathing again. But deep inside, I knew wealth alone wasn't enough. I had seen too many women, neighbors, friends, even Clara herself, discarded by their own families, forgotten, silenced, erased. That night, staring at Arthur's photograph on my mantel, I whispered, "If you gave me all this power, then I must use it for more than revenge." The idea came to me slowly then, all at once, a foundation. A refuge for women like me, like Clara, older, abandoned, treated like burdens, when in truth we carried lifetimes of strength. I named it the Williams Foundation of Second Chances. Within weeks, we rented an office downtown. Sophie threw herself into the work with an energy that lit up the room. She had Arthur's focus, but her own vision. "Grandma," she told me one night as we sifted through applications, "we're not just giving them money, we're giving them dignity back." She became the foundation's first young director, drafting programs I could never have imagined: legal aid for women cut off from inheritances, housing assistance for those pushed out of their homes, microloans for grandmothers who still dreamed of starting small businesses. Watching her was like watching a flower bloom in a place no one expected. She wasn't just my granddaughter, she was the future Arthur had believed in. Clara, too, found new purpose. She gave speeches at churches and community centers, her voice trembling but strong as she shared her own story of betrayal. "They thought they could take everything from me," she told one gathering. "But today, I stand here because Martha refused to let us stay invisible." The audience always rose to their feet, some in tears, others clutching her hands afterward, whispering their own secrets of neglect and cruelty. In the midst of this, my phone rang one evening. The voice on the line was hesitant, raw. "Mom." It was James. He called from rehab, his voice softer than I had ever heard it. I don't deserve for you to answer, but I needed to say, I'm sorry. For Sophie. For you. For everything. They make us write letters here about who we hurt, and my list was longer than the page. I closed my eyes, gripping the receiver. For weeks I had hardened myself against him, but hearing the cracks in his voice pierced me. "James," I whispered, "redemption isn't a gift. It's earned. But if you're truly willing to fight for it, then maybe one day Sophie and I will believe you." He broke down, crying openly, and for the first time I didn't hear the addict or the liar. I heard my son. As for Robert, his lessons came slower. I saw him one morning scrubbing floors in the hotel lobby, his back bent, sweat dripping down his temples. Guests walked past him without a glance, the same way he had once ignored the workers he exploited. Later he came to my office, his voice stripped of arrogance. "Mom," he said, "do you know how long it takes to change all the linens in 50 rooms? I thought I was a king. Turns out I didn't even know what work was." There was no smugness left in him, no anger, only humility. For the first time, I believed maybe Robert could change, not because he feared me, but because he was beginning to see the value of honest labor. Between Sophie's vision, Clara's resilience, James's fragile apologies, and Robert's first steps toward humility, I felt something shift inside me. Revenge had carried me this far, but now we were building something greater. Arthur had left me with money, but together we were building an empire of second chances. 1 year later, I stood under the glow of chandeliers in a ballroom that once belonged to Robert's arrogance, but now carried a new purpose. The Williams Foundation's first gala filled every table, women in elegant gowns, men in dark suits, and at every corner the stories of lives we had already touched, widows with homes again, mothers reunited with their children, grandmothers starting small businesses with pride in their eyes. I gripped the sides of the podium, the weight of 73 years on my shoulders, but my spine straighter than it had ever been. The room fell silent, waiting. In the front row, Sophie's auburn hair shone under the lights. She wore a simple dress, but she radiated confidence. Her notebook balanced on her knees, always thinking, always planning. Beside her, Clara sat tall in her navy blue shawl, hands folded, pride etched deep into her wrinkles. My eyes lingered on them, the two women who had become my pillars, and then just behind them I saw Robert and James. They hadn't wanted to come, but they had. Robert in a modest suit, calloused hands folded awkwardly in his lap. James thinner but healthier eyes, clearer than I'd seen in decades. They didn't cheer, they didn't smile, but they sat there, humbled, quiet, present. And that was enough. I cleared my throat, the microphone humming. 1 year ago, I was given an envelope that everyone laughed at. They thought it contained nothing. They thought I was nothing. The audience leaned forward. They thought they buried me in dust. But from that dust, I paused, my gaze sweeping across the sea of faces. I built a new life. Applause broke like thunder. I waited, letting it wash over me, then lifted my hand for silence. This foundation is not about revenge. I continued. It is about redemption. It is about second chances for women discarded by their families, for workers ignored by the powerful, even for children who made mistakes but dare to change. I stand here not as someone who was left behind, but as someone who rose, and I will not rise alone. My voice caught, but I steadied it. This empire is no longer built on silence or greed. It belongs to every hand that lifts another up. And it belongs to Sophie, the granddaughter I once didn't know I had, but who now carries our name forward with dignity. Sophie's eyes shimmered with tears. Clara reached over and squeezed her hand. And it belongs, I said, my gaze falling on Robert and James, to those willing to repent, to rebuild and to earn back trust brick by brick. The crowd erupted again, but this time I let it fill me completely. I wasn't invisible anymore. I wasn't the wife in the shadow of her husband, nor the mother dismissed by her children. I was Martha Williams, woman widow, mother, grandmother, builder of second chances. When I stepped down from the stage, Sophie was the first to reach me. She threw her arms around my neck, whispering, "I'll make you proud, Grandma." "You already have," I whispered back. Clara clasped my hands, tears streaming down her cheeks. "You gave us all hope." And as I looked beyond them, I caught Robert watching me with something I never thought I'd see again: respect. James, too, bowed his head as though finally understanding the weight of what had been lost and what could still be saved. The music swelled. Glasses clinked. The future stretched before me, not as a battlefield anymore, but as fertile ground. Arthur had left me money. Betrayal had left me scars. But tonight, I left something greater behind, a legacy of strength, justice, and compassion that would outlive me. I walked off that stage no longer buried in dust, but blazing like fire.